The seat was nothing special. Row 25, aisle side, wedged between a man with his laptop spilling into her elbow space and a young mother wrestling with a toddler's toy. Passengers shuffled past, adjusting backpacks, murmuring apologies, clicking overhead bins shut. To anyone else, it was just another ordinary Wednesday flight. But the woman in 25C sat straighter than the rest. Her posture alone set her apart, rigid, almost ceremonial, as if she were still in formation. Her hair, steel gray and tucked neatly beneath a faded cap, framed eyes that seemed to scan the cabin with calm precision. She didn't fidget with her phone. She didn't sigh at the crying child. She simply sat, hands folded over a carefully pressed American flag resting in her lap. Most passengers barely noticed her. In the world of airports and delays, people had learned not to look too closely. Except for one. Across the aisle, in seat 24D, a girl no older than 9 peeked over her tray table. Her big brown eyes studied the woman like she was a puzzle waiting to be solved. The girl's sneakers swung back and forth restlessly, brushing against the seat rail. "Dad," she whispered. The man beside her, tall, mid-40s, with the crisp look of someone used to boardrooms and bottom lines, barely lifted his gaze from his phone. His fingers flicked through emails, his jaw set in the constant grind of a CEO balancing deadlines and family obligations. "What is it, kiddo?" he murmured. The girl leaned closer, whispering louder. "That lady, in 25C, she looks like a soldier." Her father spared a half-second glance. Maybe. Now sit back, okay. We've got a long flight." But the girl didn't sit back. She kept watching. There was something in the way the woman's hands rested on that folded flag, something in her eyes, a quiet storm, like she carried entire chapters of history she'd never read aloud. The girl tilted her head, curiosity winning over obedience. "Dad," she said again, tugging his sleeve. "Can I go sit with her?" He exhaled sharply, frustration flickering. "Sweetheart, she probably wants to be left alone. Don't bother her." The girl frowned, then folded her arms. But her gaze never wavered. Minutes stretched. The plane taxied. Safety instructions buzzed overhead. Still, the girl's eyes stayed locked on 25C. And then, when her father's attention drifted back to his glowing phone, she slipped out of her seat. The aisle seemed enormous as she padded down the narrow strip, each step daring. Passengers glanced up briefly, assuming she was heading for the restroom. But she stopped at 25C and looked directly at the woman. The veteran's eyes softened. "Hello," she said, her voice low but steady. The girl hesitated. "Were you in the war?" The question lingered like a ripple across still water. The man with the laptop paused typing. The young mother quieted her toddler. A flight attendant, buckling herself in nearby, tilted her head curiously. The woman in 25C gave a faint smile, weathered with age but brightened by the innocence of the question. "Yes, child, a long time ago." The girl's face lit up. "I knew it. You sit like my teacher says soldiers do." The veteran chuckled softly, as though remembering another lifetime. "Your teacher's very wise." By now, whispers stirred along the row. "Did she say war?" someone murmured. Another passenger pulled out a phone, quietly typing the woman's name into a search engine after glimpsing her boarding pass. A headline popped up. Grainy photographs of a much younger version of the woman, helmet under her arm, standing beside a fighter jet. One of the first female combat pilots. The man in the suit stopped typing. The mother stilled her toddler. Eyes began to drift toward 25C. What moments before had been. An ordinary flight now felt charged with an invisible electricity. The little girl leaned against the armrest, utterly fascinated. "Was it scary?" she asked. The veteran's gaze dropped briefly to the flag in her lap. Her fingers brushed the fabric. When she looked up, her voice was steady again. "It was necessary." The girl tilted her head, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight of the answer. Before the conversation could continue, the father appeared in the aisle, his voice low but firm. "Emily, you can't just wander off like that." He placed a hand on her shoulder, gently steering her back. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am." The veteran only nodded. She wasn't a bother. Emily resisted, looking up at her father. "Dad, she's a real hero. Did you know that?" The father glanced at the woman again, this time really looking. And for the first time, he saw what his daughter had seen all along. Not just an elderly passenger in a middle row. Not just another traveler with miles behind her. But someone whose very presence carried gravity. The plane lifted from the ground, engines roaring. Emily settled reluctantly into her seat, still craning her neck to see across the aisle. And in 25C, the veteran sat quietly, hands folded on the flag, her story unspoken but slowly unfolding in the minds of everyone around her. The hum of the engines had settled into a steady lull. Hours passed, but the cabin carried a new energy, subtle, unspoken, like a secret everyone shared but no one dared to disturb. The woman in 25C hadn't moved much. Her back stayed straight, her eyes alert but distant, as if watching a movie only she could see. The folded flag never left her lap. Across the aisle, Emily still couldn't look away. She whispered endless questions to her father. What's her name? What did she fly? Did she win medals? But he had no answers. His phone now lay forgotten in the seat pocket. Something about the woman's presence had unsettled him, too, though he couldn't explain why. At last, the cabin lights brightened as the intercom crackled. The captain's calm voice floated through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Dallas-Fort Worth. Please return your seats and tray tables to their upright position. A rustle of activity swept through the rows, seatbelts clicked, windows shades lifted, conversations picked back up. Yet in row 25, silence lingered, anchored by the quiet figure on the aisle. Then, the intercom buzzed again. This time, the captain's tone shifted, softer, more deliberate. Before we land, I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone very special traveling with us today. In seat 25C is Colonel Grace Hartley. Colonel Hartley was one of the first women ever to fly combat missions for the United States Air Force. She logged over 1,200 hours in hostile skies and paved the way for generations of aviators who followed. The cabin froze. Words seemed to hang in the recycled air. The captain continued, his voice warm with respect. We are honored to have her on board today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Colonel Hartley for her service. For a heartbeat, silence. And then, like the spark of a match, applause broke out. It started with a single pair of hands in row 22, then another, then another. Soon, the sound swelled, rising above the engine's roar. Passengers stood, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. Flight attendants paused mid-checklist, hands over their hearts. Even the toddler in row 25 clapped without knowing why, echoing the rhythm of the adults around him. Grace Hartley lowered her gaze, the corners of her eyes glistening. She hadn't asked for this. Recognition was something she'd long ago stopped expecting. But as the applause wrapped around her, she allowed herself a rare smile. Emily, glowing with pride, tugged at her father's arm. See, I told you she was a hero. The father nodded, his throat tight, unable to speak. The plane touched down with a gentle jolt, rubber screeching against the runway. As it taxied toward the gate, passengers craned their necks toward the windows. A murmur spread, rippling from row to row. What's that out there? Someone whispered. Two F-35 fighter jets stood parked on the far edge of the tarmac, their sleek frames gleaming in the Texas sun. They weren't supposed to be here. Not for a routine passenger flight. As the plane rolled to a stop, the cabin filled with gasps. The F-35 canopies opened, and two young pilots climbed out. With precision, they stepped down and marched to the edge of the taxiway. Side by side, they snapped to attention, saluting the aircraft. Every phone in the cabin shot up, capturing the surreal sight. But for Grace Hartley, the world seemed to blur. Her eyes locked on the salute, a gesture she'd given countless times, now turned toward her. The weight of years, of missions flown and comrades lost, came crashing back. The flight attendant's voice wavered as she spoke. Colonel Hartley, if you'll please remain seated until the other passengers deplane, we have an escort waiting for you. But Emily had already slipped from her seat again, standing in the aisle with the kind of courage only children carry. She looked up at the veteran. Can I walk off the plane with you? Grace placed a trembling hand over the girl's. Yes, you may. The father stood too, uncertain, but Grace gave him a nod that said thank you, for letting her see me. When the cabin doors opened, passengers lined the aisle, some with hands over hearts, others with tears streaming. As Grace and Emily stepped forward, the applause followed them all the way down the jet bridge. Outside, the heat pressed down, but Grace hardly felt it. At the base of the stairs, the two F-35 pilots stood stiff, salutes unwavering. She slowed, her flag still cradled in her arms, and returned the salute with perfect precision, one last time. Emily squeezed her hand. "Does this mean you're famous now?" Grace chuckled softly, voice breaking. "No, sweetheart, it just means I'm not forgotten." The father, standing a step behind, swallowed hard. In that moment, he realized his daughter had seen something he'd almost missed, a hero hidden in plain sight. Together, the three of them crossed the tarmac. The jets loomed tall and silent behind them, guardians of a legacy too big to measure. As the cameras clicked, and applause echoed from the open windows of the plane, Grace allowed herself a thought she hadn't dared in years, that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally come home.